All right, in this video, we're going to do a walkthrough of the majority of the KVM portion of the Virt Admin I class. All right, so we're going to start by logging into the OpenStack console. I need to create a couple of VMs. So we'll go to Images under Project, and I have a new GUI image available. So we'll launch a couple of those, name them so I can tell what they are. All right, and we'll launch the second one. You'll see here we have an instance count function. So we can spawn the same VM multiple times from the same command, but it'll append like a UUID type number on the name. So we don't get a good naming convention if we do that. We just need to make a couple. It's easier just to make them individually. All right, so these are going to take a few minutes to spawn. You'll see here that some of the other instances have the two IP addresses. The 10.238 address is the floating IP, which is what we're going to use for access. And the 192 addresses are what the VMs see. And so inside the VM, if you were to look at it, like ifconfig, you'll see that. All right, so we'll associate floating IPs. I've already used a couple VMs here, so we don't need to create a new floating IP. We already have several available. So I'm just going to assign the two that I've been using. So we'll assign 47 to the first VM. And we'll assign 52 to the second VM. One of the things that we're going to do in the module is shared storage. So while we're waiting for those to spawn real quick, we can take a look at the shared storage VM. So here you can see where it's named. And if we take a look at the storage profile for it, we see that it's got 4 CPUs, 4 gigs of RAM, and an 8 gig disk. So not much storage for the base image. So we'll take a look at that. I'm going to putty into it. So it's got the .44. So you can see here our base disk, which is using LVM for this image, but that's going to be BDA. So you can see here where it's got a boot mount, and then the rest of these, all of this, is LVM on BDA. And you can see here we've got BDB, so a separate disk that we've attached to it, and you can see that this is a terabyte volume. So if we take a look at that back in OpenStack, we won't need this anymore. We can check out the volumes tab, and here you see we have this is basically a virtual block device where I've given it a name, size, and I've attached it to the shared NFS or the shared storage NFS virtual machine on dev VDB, which is the same thing that we've seen in the machine. So we can use this on any instance, which is equivalent to virtual machine. And it's like hot adding a hard drive, a SATA, or a SAS drive. All right, so let's go back to our instances. And we see one of those is completed. This image is currently cached because I've used it recently, so it takes much less time to spawn than if it was a new image. The other one should be done in just a second. So we're going to go ahead. We do have a GUI here, but we're going to use putty for the majority of our setup. And you can see that I have addresses 40 and 41 for the VM internally. So we're going to connect to VM1. You'll see we get a security warning about the SSH key because we've never seen it before. So the first thing I'm going to do is give root a password. You'll see that I had to authenticate to use sudo, and now we're assigning root a password, and now I'm going to switch to root. This just makes it so that I don't have to use sudo all over the place. All right, so because we're going to be doing migrations, we need some enterprise packages that are not available in the standard EPEL repository for Linux. So we have to add a couple repositories. We're going to use QEMU KVM EV, which is a rebuild from Virt. So we need to add an Virt repository, and it has a dependency on one of the Gluster APIs. So we need to add the Gluster repository as well. We're going to have to do this with both VMs, so they have identical configurations, and I have some commands prepped already so that the demo goes a little bit quicker. So the first thing we'll add is the Gluster repo. So I've created the file for the Gluster repo, and now I need to add in contents there. Whenever you're pasting into Vi or Vim, make sure you enter insert mode first with the I key, and then we can just paste. All right, so there's our Gluster repo. I've called this the KVM Rev repo because that was the original rebuild that I used in my first lab that has now been replaced by EV, which is what we're going to get here. All right, so this is the Virt repository. And now we can install the necessary packages for KVM. Yeah, other instances still spawning. Could be hitting a server that's got a lot of usage. All right, so our packages are installed. First thing we're going to do is tell the libvirt daemon to turn on at boot, and we're going to start it. And we need to allow IP forwarding on our physical NIC. So what this does is tell our Linux machine here that we want to allow IP forwarding so that we can have two different IP addresses hit that NIC and still be used. I'm going to skip down here a second, and we need to make a few directories. So here we're making a directory for VM images on shared storage, and an ISOs directory to put ISOs in. So each of those needs to be accessible by several different service accounts and processes for KVM and QEMU and libvirt, several packages like that. So we need to add context to those in SE Linux. Right, and we need to tell SE Linux to allow us to use NFS. Some of the SE Linux commands take a bit to complete. Let's make sure we're still spawning here. Yes, we are. Okay. Some usually long time. Oh, there we go. We're active. So that was a long time for that to spawn. All right, so let's get a connection up to our other VM here. So it'll be 52. All right, so when we get a connection refused there for an instance that just spawned, it's because it is still booting. The operating system itself is still booting up. All right, so let's try that again. So we need to do basically the same configuration here. Alright, so I'll just add those repos again to our other virtual machine. And install the packages. Alright, so while we're waiting on the packages, we are going to add a NATed network for our nested VMs. So normally we would use bridge networking here because it's easier. You can configure it from the command line. Why did this fail? I probably forgot to hit insert. Yep. Alright, so remember, don't forget to hit insert before you paste. That was fine. Alright, let's try this again. Alright, so we're going to set up a NATed network. It's going to have a virtual network and the virtual bridge for NATing and set up NAT rules. The only way that I know how to configure that from the command line is to create the XML document for the network and then use Verish and net create. So that's kind of outside the scope of the class. So we're going to do it from the GUI. Alright, so I'm using RDP here for my connection. It usually takes just a minute because it's probably going to log me in here. Alright, our package installation is done, so let's jump back over to VM2. And we'll start those services, allow IP forwarding, read that into our configuration, make the same directories, set the same SE Linux contexts, and allow NFS. Alright, so here we're going to go to Applications and System Tools and Virtual Machine Manager. And this is on our VM1. You can see our address up here, .47. One thing you're going to see is this GNOME shell requires QEMU KVM. Because we're using a rebuild, we're using QEM KVM EV, and we don't have a rebuild of Virt Manager available. We're going to get a couple error messages relating to the QEMU KVM package. Again, we're not using that, so they're not going to affect us other than we're going to have to acknowledge them. So we have to authenticate, so we need root privileges to connect here. All right, so from Virtual Machine Manager, we're going to go to Edit, Preferences. Oh, not Preferences, sorry about that. This is our connection to QEMU libvirt, so we're going to right click on that, go to Details. You can see on Storage, it's not going to show up until we make anything. Okay, but we're going to go to Virtual Networks. We need to create a virtual network. So we're going to call it Default. So usually this is what gets created automatically when you're using the standard packages. So we'll call it Default. Go forward. We're going to create a NATed network. So this is going to be our address space, and this is going to be our DHCP range. So our nested VMs are going to get DHCP addresses automatically. No IPv6. So again, we're going to use NAT. We're going to forward. So NAT, leave it on any physical device. Click finish. We're going to get an error. Again, this is related directly to the standard QEMU, which we're not using. So you can see that it did indeed create our network, even though it gave us an error. All right, so now we're going to switch back to our PuTTY instances. And if we look here, we can see that we've created Burbridge 0. And if we look in Burish, we have our network. Oh, and it looks like we need to set it to auto start. All right, so back to the GUI for a second. Back to Virtual Machine Manager. Okay, so we're active and on auto start for the network. So the bridge just isn't active, which is fine. It'll become active whenever we create a virtual machine using it. All right, so next we're going to do some more prep for our migration process. So we need to add some firewall. We need to allow some ports through the firewall. This port range, 49152 through 49215, is the range that libvirt uses for migrations, for tunnel migrations. And we need to reload the firewall after we do that. All right, we're going to create our first virtual machine. Oh, we need to restart networking now that we've made our virtual network. So let's restart networking. Now we're going to create our virtual machine. And I haven't uploaded the ISO yet, so I'm going to use FileZilla to upload the ISO. So we're gonna upload the ISO to VM1. So again, that's going to be our access IP, the 10.238.253.47 for VM1. We're going to log in with root on port 22, and you'll see it dumps us into root's home folder. So we need to go up one level. So we created all of our directories in root, and you can see we have our ISO directory here. So we'll just go in there. So you can see we're in root ISOs, where we want to upload ISOs to. So the whole right-hand side is going to be the virtual machine. And then over here, we have our, this is our local directory or local computer. And you can see that I've already used SISOs on FileZilla today. So that's where we want to navigate to. If you're not there already, you can use this drop down here. And I'm just going to upload the CentOS minimal image. All right, so our ISO is finished uploading. So I'm going to create the minimal CentOS image here. You can see that the virt install command is rather long, but that is why I'm using virt install. I'm naming it RMH CentOS. We've got a gig of RAM, one virtual CPU. The OS type is Linux, and we're using a RHEL 7 distro. CentOS 7 is a RHEL 7 distro. We are connecting, we're giving it a network command, and we're connecting to a virtual network, which has the name default. Graphics, we're going to be using Spice. We do not want an auto console because that would try to generate the console here in PuTTY, our PuTTY connection. We are going to accelerate graphics. We're going to use hardware virtualization if available. This disk path is our virtual hard drive. And importantly, we are using the image container format. It's going to be 2 gig in size. That's split between the line here. And this is the location of our ISO, which is going to be attached to our virtual CD-ROM drive and handle our installation. All right, so we'll see that it has created that virtual machine, and it's telling me that installation is still in progress because we haven't done an auto console. So we're going to use Virt Viewer to connect to this. So we're going to go back to our remote desktop session here and open Virtual Machine Manager, authenticate, open our virtual machine. We're going to make this bigger. And I'm going to change the resolution here. Our resolution defaulted to 1024 768 for our VM. So the easiest way to do that, click on the desktop, go to change desktop background. I'll right click on the desktop, change background, click the back arrow here, and you'll get all settings. Go to displays, and we're going to match the monitor resolution, which is 1280 by 1024. Click apply, keep the configuration. There we go. And now we can maximize this, and we get pretty much the whole install screen. All right, so we're just going to do a minimal install here. We don't have any other options. I'm using the minimal ISO. You can see we have the 2 gig disk. We're going to let it automatically create partitionings, and we're going to turn on our network card. And you can see we get that 192.168.100 address inside of our DHCP scope. So our layer 2 guest, which is what you would technically call this because it's inside 2 hypervisors, now has networking. We're going to begin the installation here. Give root the password. And our installation will take a few minutes. So we're going to do some more prep for the rest of the module here. So I'm going to minimize this entirely. All right, so we've got our firewall configurations done. And we want to use shared storage. So we're going to go to fstab, which is our file for controlling mounts. And we're going to mount our NFS share here. So the first thing we need is the IP address. Remember, this is going to be the internal IP address, or it's not really internal, but the IP address of the VM, what it sees. So that's going to be 192.168.112.5 is the address of the shared storage machine. So 112.5, and we're going to mount root because we're using NFS 4, so it has a sudo root directory. We are going to mount this to NFS-VM-images. The file system type is NFS 4. We're going to set options. So we're going to set version equals 4.1. I think we're missing something here. We'll see in just a second. All right, and we're going to set that to 1.2. All right. Okay, so we mounted there. So let's see if there's anything in there. And there is. You can see there's a couple VMs there from where I was doing testing earlier on shared storage. And this command here, mount-a, is just mount all. also mount everything that's available in Etsy fstab. I actually don't want those files there, so I'm going to remove them. All right, let's check on our installation. Installation's almost complete. So we need to also mount shared storage on our second VM. And let's cat this. All right, now we've got our storage mounted on both machines. All right, we're doing post-installation steps now, so almost done here. One more thing we can do for prep is when we do live migration that doesn't have shared storage, the configurations have to match exactly on both servers. They have to match exactly for shared storage as well. So we have that. But the one thing we're missing is we don't have the virtual hard drive on VM2 for that VM that we've made. So we need to add that hard drive to VM2. So we'll just do that with the DD command. You can also do it with the QEMU image command, but the lab calls for DD, so we're going to do it that way. Now this needs to be exactly the same location and name of the VM that we've created. So you can see here it's VM images, which is where we put it, and RMH CentOS images. So what this does here is the command DD is going to use the null interface, so not a real interface. It's going to copy from there. It's basically going to write zeros, and it's going to copy to here, so in interface and out interface. And we're going to use a base size of 1 meg, and seek here is going to be where it's going to stop, and that's 2048 megabytes or 2 gigs, which matches the disk size of the VM that we created. All right, so you can see that that's done. It tells you what it did, which is copy a bunch of zeros, basically. So we can look at this. So we'll go to LL VM images, and you can see that we now have this disk, and that is this size. It's 2 gigs. That's in bytes. So this is on VM2. Let's look at VM1 and make sure that this matches. And you can see that it does match. So you may see that the automatic bug reporting tool, it's complaining about XRDP, which is fine because it's not an official package. So we're going to reboot here because our installation is finished, and more than likely because of the way that we created the VM, it's going to shut down here instead of reboot. As you can see, it's shut down. So what I'm going to do now is just remove the CD-ROM drive from the image because we no longer need it, or from the VM. And we're going to power this back on. Okay, so let's log into it. And let's ping Google. All right, we can ping Google. So let's get ready to migrate this. So we're migrating from VM1 to VM2. Oh, I forgot to do one other thing. Since we're not using DNS and the Burish migrate command must be able to resolve a name for where we're migrating to. We're going to enter that information into hosts. So let's see. We don't need to look at that. But you can see our host name. It's the same as what's on the side, but we're going to be in the Nova local domain. So we're going to go edit our hosts file. And we're going to go, so this is going to be the IP address of the opposite virtual machine. So we'll go 192.168.112, and oh, I scrolled up there. VM2 is 52. Oh, I'm sorry. VM2 is 41. So remember, this is our 192 address. So it's 41, and VM1 is 40. So 41. And this is RMH VM2. So what I named it, .nova local. And we need to do that over here as well. And I said VM1 was 40, right? Yes, 40. Okay, now we should be set. So let's see here. We've got our migrate. And we're going to be migrating to 192.168.112.41. So let's look at this. We're using Burish. We're issuing migrate sub command. We're doing that on RMH CentOS. That's the name of the virtual machine. This is going to be a persistent transfer. And we're doing copy storage all because it's not a shared storage. And we're going to do verbose output, which in this case isn't very helpful. It's supposed to be extra output, but basically all it does is after the transfer is entirely complete, print 100% migrate. One thing I don't want to do is undefined source. That will just remove the virtual machine from KVM management. So when we do it this way, we're going to end up with the virtual hard disk on both machines. So what it's going to do is it's going to create the VM on, it's going to create our layer 2 VM, RMH CentOS, on VM2. And then once it's done creating it and copying all the storage, it's going to shut this one off. It's going to shut the version of it on VM1 off, and it's going to resume the version on VM2 because when it creates it, it's going to be paused. So we're going to try and see as much of this as possible. Since we are using Virt Viewer, the one thing that's happened is in our VM1 connection, Virt Viewer is going to lose it altogether when it shuts down. So this is going to go away. So I'm going to move this over here, and we're going to get an RDP connection to our second virtual machine. Sometimes that happens on the first connection attempt. You get an error. Just connect again. It usually only happens on the very first attempt to connect to a brand new VM. All right, as you can see, it logged me in. So we're going to change the resolution here as well. I'm going to open Virtual Machine Manager, and we'll see we're going to get the same error message. Oh, I need to authenticate. So we're going to see the VM show up over here as it gets transferred. All right, so let's get as much of this as we can see as possible. This is VM1 where we're going to issue the command. This is VM2. And one of the things I want to do is install couple other packages so that we can really see this happen. Because we're transferring storage, there's a decent amount of data. We're only transferring the disk, and it is a sparse disk, so it's not a lot of data. But if it was something like Windows Server, then it would be, considerably larger. So we're going to watch this transfer happen. I'm going to use interface top, and it's going to show us our interface connections. So this is VM2. This is going to show us traffic at the destination, so where we're migrating to. Let's start pinging here again. And we can see the pings going through now. All right, let me get, we already have the migrate command. All right, so now we can see pretty much everything. Let's issue the migrate command. It's going to say it's an untrusted key. Type yes. We'll have to input root's password here. Oh, we didn't create the network. Forgot to do one thing. All right, so let's stop pings here. Stop pinging Google. All right, so what that's complaining about is we don't have a matching network on our destination, which of course doesn't work very well when you're going for no service interruptions. So we're just going to create the same network that we already created on VM1. So all the defaults. Again, we're going to get that error message about QEMU. And there we go. All right. Let's clear this. We're going to start our pings up again. Get our 2 command prompts here. And we'll migrate. All right, so we should see another connection established over here on VM2. Okay, so our first attempt there, you see it failed. You see we had it shut down virtual machine manager over here because the connection closed. And over here we got the error. So I fired it up again. And you can see where it's created it here. So it's tried to do the migrate. Oh, there we go. Now we're getting storage migration. So you can see here we're getting half a gig a second, basically. I'm not sure why it failed the first time. I thought it was going to be a problem with SE Linux. All right, so you can see that it's synced the storage states. And here we've gone from running to shut off. And over here we've gone from paused to running. I actually started this while the machine was booting back up. So if you notice that you can see where it completed over here. But if you notice that it's just sitting there for a while and you are having to be watching the network traffic, it's because it has to sync the storage states because it's running. It's a live migration. So it has to sync memory states. So sometimes it can take a while to do that. And you can see that we're now running over here. One thing I forgot to do was the restart of pings to see how many we skipped. But you can see that it's the way it does the transfer. There's very little for the user. One thing that will happen is, depending on the connection type, because it's a storage migration, you will get disconnected and have to log back into your console. Whereas with a live migration, that wouldn't happen. All right, so let's shut this off here. You can see that now we have the VM in both locations. So let's clone our VM here on VM1. Clone our layer 2 VM over to our shared storage. All right, so we're using the Virt clone command. We're going to tell it that this is the original VM. See the original switch here. We're going to give it a name. So this is the name of our new VM. I'm just going to put SH on the end of it because it's shared storage. And we have to give it a disk location as well. So it'll take just a minute to do that because, again, we're replicating storage. So you can see here where it's creating it. All right, so let's turn it on. And because we're using Virt Viewer here and because we're using a NATed network, we are going to get disconnected graphically from the console. If we were using a bridge network, which in this case we can't do in this environment, but normally you would be able to do this if you were just using one layer, if you were using regular VMs basically, instead of using nested, then you'd be able to see this. You should be able to use bridge networking. We would not get disconnected at all. So one thing we're going to do here is let's fire up the pings this time so we can see any interruption. And because we're using shared storage, the only thing we have to migrate now is what's running in memory. So we have a very similar command here. We're going to 41. So it's basically the same command we saw before, except the only thing we're passing is persistent. We're not using the storage copy at all. So we'll have to authenticate again. Okay, if we look here, it says unsafe if disk cache mode does not equal none. So our VMs are caching the disk here. Looks like a new default. So I'm going to go to Virtual Machine Manager. And I'll have to check on the command line version of this so that we don't do that next time we do an install from the command line. So we're going to shut this down. I'm going to open it. We're going to edit it. Or we're going to go to the Virt IO disk. Go to performance options. We're going to set the cache mode to none. Apply. Power on the VM. Okay, so we're going to start up our pings. We're all ready to go here. We're going to use the persistent switch. Authenticate with the root password of our other machine. And you can see that we're pretty much instantly disconnected here and that we're running over here. So let's open this up real fast. And you can see that our pings are running. Okay, our pings stopped. Usually that doesn't happen. Okay, our ping stopped because the networking is not working over here on this side. There we go. That's why it doesn't like that, because of our virtual. Oh, I forgot I can't use the command to bring up my little pointer tool inside the layer 2 guest. So this is why, because we're using the NATed virtual network, it's complaining about the MAC addresses whenever we do the live migration. So of course, if you were doing this in a production environment and you needed a real live migration because you were, didn't want to lose access, you would not be using a NATed network. You'd be using a bridge, and you wouldn't have this problem. All right, so that pretty much covers the whole KVM module for the most part. So we've covered setting up KVM on 2 machines, creating a virtual machine, installing with command line, a little bit of networking, non-shared storage live migrations and shared storage live migrations. Also, we just briefly touched the setup there on shared storage. Let's see, we have a new IP address now. So after rebooting our networking functions again, and again, this is a layer 2 guest, which is why we're using a NATed network. So pretty good performance, actually, especially with the migrations. So what we have, for those that don't know, is we have bare metal running KVM, and then this machine here that we're remote desktoped into is running KVM. So that's what they call nested virtualization. And then we're running a VM inside of this. So this is what we would call our layer 2 guest or level 2 guest.